The first steel tower appeared on my mountain while I was burying my wife. I left Montana for 6 days to take her ashes back to Oregon, where her family had lived before we met. When I returned, contractors had cut a 60-foot corridor through my lodgepole pines, poured 3 concrete foundations, and flown sections of a ski lift tower onto my land by helicopter. The HOA president told me an old logging easement gave the resort permanent rights to cross the mountain. It didn't. The easement allowed timber trucks to use one 12-foot road for 5 years, beginning in 1988. It didn't authorize 70-foot steel towers, overhead cables, avalanche explosive, maintenance vehicles, or thousands of skiers passing above my property every winter. By the time I stopped construction, the developer had spent $4 million on the lift and pre-sold 84 luxury cabins advertised as having direct ski access. They believed no court would strand that many buyers over an easement that had expired 31 years earlier. Then I found a snow safety report inside a county archive. The report showed that 4 lift towers stood inside the runout zone of an avalanche that had crossed the same slope twice before. The developer's engineers had seen the map. The insurance company hadn't. My name is Henry Caldwell. I'm 66 years old, and I own 96 acres in Granite County, Montana. My property lies along a narrow mountain saddle between the town of Pine Crossing and the upper slopes of Whitecap Ridge. The land isn't flat enough for traditional farming. There's a small house, an equipment barn, 30 acres of timber, 2 open meadows, and a creek that freezes solid by January. The highest boundary reaches just over 800 feet. My grandfather purchased the first 40 acres in 1952. My father added neighboring parcels whenever logging companies sold small pieces they no longer needed. By the time I inherited the property, the land formed a continuous strip from the county road to the western shoulder of Whitecap Ridge. I spent 34 years working in mountain safety. I started on a ski patrol when I was 19. Later, I became an avalanche technician for the State Highway Department. My job involved studying snow layers, setting weather instruments, closing mountain roads, and helping controlled release teams reduce hazards above transportation corridors. I understood what snow could do. A calm white slope can hold thousands of tons of weight in place for weeks. Then one weak layer fails. The entire mountain starts moving. My wife, Margaret, understood the work better than anyone. She ran a small veterinary clinic in Pine Crossing and spent 38 winters listening to weather radios at 2 in the morning. When she became sick, I retired to care for her. She died in early June, a little more than a year after her diagnosis. That was when Summit Crown Development arrived. The company had purchased 620 acres east of my property from a private timber corporation. Its project was called Whitecap Village. The plan included 84 luxury cabins, a clubhouse, heated pools, restaurants, a spa, mountain bike trails, and a private ski connection to the existing Whitecap Ridge Resort. Cabin prices started at $1 million. The largest properties exceeded $3 million. Summit Crown created the Whitecap Village Homeowners Association before selling the first cabin. The developer appointed the original board. Its vice president of mountain operations, Lucas Shaw, became HOA president. Lucas was 49 and had worked at major ski resorts across Colorado, Utah, and British Columbia. He wasn't ignorant about mountains. That made the decisions he later made harder to excuse. Lucas visited me 9 months before Margaret died. He brought 2 engineers and a map showing the proposed lift. The lower terminal would sit inside Whitecap Village near the clubhouse. The line would travel west across my mountain saddle and connect with an upper ski trail operated by Whitecap Ridge Resort. 7 of the proposed 19 lift towers stood on my land. A cable would pass more than a mile across my property. Summit Crown wanted a permanent aerial and surface easement. The easement would allow construction, lift operation, ski passage, grooming, snowmaking, avalanche control, rescue access, vegetation management, utility lines, and year-round maintenance. In practical terms, Summit Crown wanted a strip of my mountain forever. The initial offer was $420. Ling, ling, ling. I declined. Lucas increased it to $650. Ling ling ling. I still declined. My reasons weren't only sentimental. The proposed line crossed my timber. Upper meadow. Spring. And the winter route I used to reach the western boundary. The company wanted the right to remove trees and control access beneath the cable. Avalanche control language allowed explosives and closures on portions of my property. The easement could be transferred to the HOA, resort operator, Linner, or another company without my approval. Once recorded, it would burden the land permanently. Lucas asked whether I would consider a 30-year lease. Summit Crown would pay $70. 000 annually. Adjusted for inflation. I told him I might consider a shorter seasonal license after Margaret's treatment ended. But I wasn't prepared to negotiate then. He appeared sympathetic. I understand, he said. Family comes first. 2 months later, Summit Crown's attorney sent a letter claiming the neighboring parcel already held crossing rights through a 1,988 logging easement. That easement had been created when Western Pine Timber Company harvested trees above my father's property. The company received temporary use of a 12-foot road crossing the northern edge of our land. The agreement lasted 5 years. It allowed timber trucks, road repair, drainage maintenance, and removal of trees necessary to keep the road open. The term ended in 1993. Western Pine stopped using the road and removed its temporary bridge. The agreement expressly stated that no permanent easement was created. Summit Crown had purchased land once owned by Western Pine. It hadn't purchased an expired temporary license. I sent the full document to Lucas. He replied that Summit Crown's title attorneys believed certain access rights survived expiration because portions of the road remained visible and had occasionally been used by hunters and utility crews. That argument didn't make sense. Hunters entered with permission or trespassed. Utility crews used separate recorded rights. An abandoned road doesn't become a permanent ski lift corridor because tire tracks remain visible. I hired a real estate attorney named Julia Mercer. Julia specialized in ranch, timber, and mountain access disputes. She reviewed my deed. Summit Crown's title, the 1,988 agreement, survey maps, utility easements, and historic aerial photographs. Her conclusion was direct. Summit Crown had no ski lift rights over my property. It didn't have logging rights either. The temporary agreement had expired exactly as written. Julia sent a certified notice prohibiting survey, clearing, drilling, construction, skier access, or avalanche control activity without my written permission. Summit Crown responded that it reserved all historical access rights. No one entered my property for several months. Margaret's health worsened. I stopped paying attention to Whitecap Village. That was what Summit Crown counted on. The company revised its county plans. The original public map showed the lift bending north around my property. That route required 4 additional towers, crossed steeper terrain, and increased construction cost by approximately $2. $6 million. The revised route ran straight across my mountain. The county planning drawings labeled the corridor, existing timber, and recreational access. The lift permit application included the 1,988 agreement. The page showing the 5-year expiration appeared in the file, but Summit Crown's legal summary described the expiration as applying only to commercial timber hauling, not to successor access uses. No court had ever accepted that interpretation. No landowner had agreed to it. Summit Crown presented a disputed legal theory as established site control. Construction began in May. Margaret died on June 4. I took her ashes to Oregon 6 days later. Before leaving, I locked every gate and activated 4 trail cameras. The morning after I returned, I heard a helicopter above the western meadow. I drove uphill. A 60-foot corridor had been cleared through the lodgepole pines. 3 concrete foundations stood near the center of my property. A helicopter lowered a steel tower section toward one of them. Contractors had used the abandoned logging road to enter from Summit Crown's side. They widened it from 12 feet to 28. Trees were pushed into piles along the slope. A temporary fuel tank and generator sat near my spring. I counted 37 freshly cut trees before I stopped. My first thought wasn't legal. It was Margaret. We had walked that meadow 2 weeks before she entered hospice. She'd stopped beside the spring because she was too tired to continue. We sat there for almost an hour. Now a tower foundation stood less than 40 yards away. I ordered the superintendent to stop construction. He showed me Summit Crown's site plan and county permit. The map colored the lift corridor blue and described Summit Crown as the authorized easement holder. I called the sheriff's office. 2 deputies arrived. Lucas came by helicopter 20 minutes later with the project attorney. He offered his condolences before discussing the lift. That made the conversation worse. I asked why Summit Crown built after receiving Julia's notice. Lucas said the company's legal opinion confirmed access rights. Then why did you offer me $650? Ling ling ling. To remove uncertainty and avoid conflict. You knew I refused. We believed your refusal applied to a new permanent easement, not use of the existing corridor. The existing agreement expired in 1993. Our attorneys disagree about the effect of that language. I pointed toward the foundation. Does a logging road look like a 70-foot lift tower to you? Lucas remained calm. The purpose evolved. The access right remains. The deputies documented the clearing, foundations, machinery, and my objection. They wouldn't decide the easement dispute. Property rights required a court. They warned Summit Crown that continuing after notice could increase damages. Lucas suspended work for the day. Before leaving, he asked to speak privately. We stood near the cut tree line. The helicopter noise faded toward Whitecap Village. Lucas said Summit Crown had already pre-sold 41 cabins. Buyers expected direct ski access by December. The lift contract contained delay penalties. Whitecap Ridge Resort had scheduled trail connections and staffing. Summit Crown's lender had released millions based on the approved route. He offered me $900. 000 for the easement. I refused. 1 million. He said, no. What number solves this? You're asking the wrong question. Every property question has a number. This one had an answer before you poured concrete. Lucas looked toward the tower foundation. Once this lift is operating, thousands of people will depend on it. No judge is going to dismantle a regional transportation system because an old timber document used the wrong expiration language. The language isn't wrong. It's debatable. It says 5 years. He folded his arms. You can spend 3 years proving that. Or you can take $1 million now. That was his arrogant line. He believed delay would become another construction tool. If Summit Crown built quickly enough, the completed lift would create economic pressure stronger than my deed. I gave him one lawful option. Summit Crown could stop construction, remove the foundations, and use the northern route on land it owned. Or it could sign a 2-season temporary license while redesigning. The license would cost $150. 000 per season. Summit Crown would fund a $1.5 million restoration bond. Limi construction and maintenance access. Protect the spring. Compensate for every tree removed. And agree that the license created no permanent rights. 2 seasons gave the company time to serve existing buyers without burdening my land forever. Lucas rejected it. He said Summit Crown couldn't finance a temporary lift corridor. Lenders required long-term site control. That statement revealed the real issue. The company didn't need access for 2 winters. It needed my land as collateral for decades of resort revenue. The following morning, Summit Crown resumed construction. Julia filed suit before noon. We requested a declaration that the 1,988 agreement had expired, an immediate construction injunction, restoration of the land, and damages for trespass and tree removal. Summit Crown counterclaimed it asserted an easement by express grant. Prescription, implication, necessity, and public reliance. 5 theories. None matched the facts cleanly. Its necessity claim was especially weak. Whitecap Village had public road access and could construct the northern lift route entirely on its own land. The route was more expensive. Expense doesn't create necessity. The emergency hearing occurred 5 days later. Summit Crown argued that stopping construction would cost more than $120, 000 per day, and threaten the entire winter season. Julia presented the 1,988 agreement. Expiration clause. My survey. Certified notice. Purchase offers. And Summit Crown's original northern route. The judge asked why Summit Crown negotiated for a new easement if it believed permanent rights already existed. The company said the offers were intended to clarify and modernize historical rights. The judge wasn't convinced. He issued a temporary injunction prohibiting clearing, drilling, blasting, concrete work, tower erection, câble installation, skier access, or maintenance activity on my property. Summit Crown could weatherproof existing foundations but couldn't continue construction. The company had 21 days to remove equipment and temporary fuel storage. 3 lift towers remained partially assembled on the ground. 7 foundations sat in cleared openings. The corridor cut across my mountain like a wound. Summit Crown continued building on its own property, hoping to reverse the order before cable installation. The lender suspended the next construction draw. Whitecap Ridge Resort paused trail work. Buyers began asking questions. Summit Crown sent them a letter stating that a temporary landowner dispute had delayed a small section of the lift. The letter said the developer expected a prompt resolution. It didn't say I had never signed an easement. It didn't say the logging agreement expired 31 years earlier. It didn't say Summit Crown had an alternate route. One buyer named Rebecca Hale contacted me. Rebecca was 57. A retired public school superintendent from Minneapolis. She and her husband had reserved a $1.8 million cabin. Ski access was the main reason they chose Whitecap Village. Rebecca expected me to be hostile. Instead, she asked for documents. I showed her the temporary logging agreement, Julia's notices, Summit Crown's purchase offers, and the court order. She studied the expiration clause. Why are they calling this temporary? She asked. Because permanent trespass sounds worse. Rebecca contacted other buyers. Within 2 weeks, 17 had requested full disclosure of the lift's site rights. Summit Crown's purchase contracts described the lift as a planned amenity subject to government approval and construction conditions. That language gave the developer flexibility, but sales representatives had repeatedly described the route as secure. Several buyers had emails stating the lift easement was permanent. Those messages conflicted with the lawsuit and court injunction. 8 buyers demanded deposit refunds. Summit Crown returned 3 voluntarily. The others entered mediation. Julia requested the entire lift permit file from the county, State Passenger Ropeway Safety Board, Forest Service Trail Coordinator, and Summit Crown's insurer. The mechanical plans were extensive. Tower loads, câble tension, brake systems, evacuation procedures, wind limits, electrical controls, emergency communications, daily inspection requirements. The equipment itself came from a reputable manufacturer. The route approval depended on 3 categories of information: legal site control, geotechnical stability, and snow safety management. Summit Crown had problems with all 3. The site control certificate stated that permanent easements had been obtained for the entire lift line. Lucas signed it 3 months after Julia sent formal notice disputing access. The geotechnical report examined foundation conditions, but treated the tower corridor as if Summit Crown controlled it. The snow safety plan referenced a modern avalanche model prepared by Alpine Risk Consultants. The model classified most of my mountain saddle as low to moderate hazard. 4 proposed towers fell near the edge of a modeled runout area, but outside the line Summit Crown considered operationally significant. That conclusion surprised me. I had worked on Whitecap Ridge avalanche incidents in the 1980s and 1990s. I remembered 2 slides reaching farther west. One occurred before modern digital records. The other closed a county road for 3 days. I searched my old notebooks. In February 1996, I had written, Whitecap East Bowl released naturally at approximately 3:20 a.m. Debris crossed Old Western Pine Road and reached Caldwell Lower Meadow. The proposed lift crossed that same road. If my note was accurate, the avalanche had traveled beyond Summit Crown's mapped runout. I contacted a former highway engineer named Thomas Avery. Thomas remembered the 1996 event. He told me the county had commissioned an avalanche study after the road closure. The study predated digital archives and wasn't listed in the modern planning database. We submitted a records request. An archive technician found 3 boxes in the basement of the old Public Works building. Inside was a 78-page report prepared in 1997. The report contained photographs, snow depth measurements, witness interviews, terrain profil, and a hand-drawn hazard map. It documented two major avalanche events. The first occurred in 1978, the second in 1996. Both began inside Whitecap's East Bowl. Both crossed the old logging road. The 1,996 debris traveled almost 600 feet beyond Summit Crown's modern runout line. 4 proposed towers sat inside the historic path. Tower 9 stood near the deepest measured debris deposit. Tower 10 stood on a bench, where trees had been snapped more than 15 feet above the ground. The report recommended that no occupied building or fixed passenger infrastructure be placed inside the runout zone without site-specific engineering and an active avalanche control program. A ski lift could potentially operate there. Many mountain resorts manage avalanche terrain safely, but the risk had to be studied honestly. Summit Crown's modern plan didn't mention either historic event. I sent the report to Julia and an independent avalanche engineer named Dr. Alan Pierce. Alan compared the historic map with Summit Crown's model. The modern model used a starting zone depth based on 25 years of recent snow data. It didn't include the larger 1,996 event. It also assumed dense, mature forest would slow debris along part of the path. Summit Crown had cleared 60 feet of that forest for the lift corridor. Removing trees changed surface roughness and could allow an avalanche to travel farther. Alan didn't claim the lift was impossible. He recommended a new runout analysis. Tower Impact Design Review. Operational closure thresholds. Rescue planning. And evaluation of remote avalanche control systems. Those measures could cost millions. More importantly, they could require moving towers 9 through 12. Julia submitted the historic report to the State Ropeway Board and Summit Crown's insurer. The board suspended final route approval pending review. The insurer issued a reservation letter requesting proof that avalanche history had been fully disclosed. Lucas called me the same day. He accused me of exaggerating an event that occurred almost 30 years earlier. It crossed the tower line. I said, there are lifts in avalanche terrain all over Montana. They operate under plans based on the actual terrain. Our engineers used modern modeling. They left out 2 known slides. You don't know they knew about them. He was right about one narrow point. I didn't yet know whether Summit Crown or Alpine Risk had seen the 1,997 report. Then the county archive technician found the checkout log. The 1,997 study had been requested 18 months earlier by Alpine Risk consultants. The requester's name was Daniel Cross, the lead analyst who prepared Summit Crown's modern avalanche model. He had reviewed the historic report before issuing the map that excluded its longest runout. Alan requested Alpine Risk's underlying model files and technical correspondence. Summit Crown resisted, claiming consultant work product. The Ropeway Board required production as part of its safety review. The files arrived 3 weeks later. An internal email from Daniel Cross to Lucas appeared near the top. Subject: Historic Runout Conflict Whitecap East Bow. Daniel wrote, the 1,996 debris extent intersects towers 9-12 under the current alignment. Incorporating the full historic event will likely push the line into high hazard classification and trigger structural redesign or route relocation. Recommend discussing whether the event can be treated as anomalous due to pre-forest recovery conditions. Lucas replied, use accepted modern dataset. Historic outlier should not control a $9M lift alignment unless the state specifically requires it. Alpine Risk's final report didn't describe the 1,996 avalanche as an outlier. It didn't mention it at all. The omission wasn't a modeling disagreement anymore. It was a known event removed because acknowledging it threatened the preferred route. The Ropeway Board halted review of the entire lift. Summit Crown's insurer suspended construction coverage for the disputed alignment. The lender froze all remaining lift funds, and the county placed occupancy holds on cabins whose sales contracts represented direct ski access as a completed or secured amenity. By then, Summit Crown had pre-sold 84 cabins and accepted more than $17 million in deposits. The developer hadn't only built a lift across land it didn't control. It had selected the route after being told 4 towers stood inside a documented avalanche runout and then allowed buyers, regulators, lenders, and insurers to rely on a map that erased the event. Lucas believed the expired logging easement was his biggest problem. It wasn't. The land dispute could be solved with money or relocation. The avalanche record created a different question. Even if I sold Summit Crown every acre it wanted, could the lift safely remain where the company had already poured its foundations? The answer arrived in Alan's preliminary model 11 days later, when he included the 1996 event, Courant Terrain, cleared forest corridor, and modern extreme snow assumptions. The projected avalanche path didn't stop at Tower 12. It crossed the future beginner ski trail, reached the edge of the clubhouse service road, and overlapped the emergency evacuation area shown on Summit Crown's operating plan. Moving 4 towers might not be enough. The lower terminal itself could be in the wrong place, and according to Summit Crown's financing documents, relocating that terminal would require redesigning the clubhouse, rerouting underground utilities, and eliminating 11 of the most expensive cabin lots in Whitecap Village. The disputed strip across my mountain was no longer the only part of the project they might lose. The avalanche map threatened the entire center of the development. Alan didn't recommend evacuating Whitecap Village. No one lived there yet, and the avalanche terrain was stable under summer conditions. He recommended stopping construction until engineers answered 5 questions. How far could a large avalanche travel under present terrain conditions? What impact forces could reach the lift towers? Could the lower terminal remain where Summit Crown planned to build it? Which areas needed permanent winter closures? And who would own, fund, and operate the avalanche control program after Summit Crown transferred the development to homeowners? That final question became more important than the others. Summit Crown planned to complete the lift, sell the cabins, and transfer common facilities to Whitecap Village HOA, the lift, maintenance building, access roads, evacuation equipment, snow fences, warning systems, and avalanche control responsibilities would eventually belong to 84 homeowners. The public HOA budget allocated $65,000 per year for lift maintenance. It allocated $18,000 for snow safety operations. That might cover signage, weather equipment, and occasional consultant visits. It wouldn't fund a professional avalanche control team, explosives program, remote release equipment, specialized insurance, tower monitoring, rescue training, and annual certification. Alan estimated a realistic snow safety budget between $240,000 and $390 per year. Depending on the final alignment and control methods, the HOA reserve contained no dedicated avalanche fund. Summit Crown planned to hand homeowners a mountain transportation system with operating costs several times larger than the budget disclosed to them. Rebecca Hale organized a buyer meeting. 46 families attended in person or online. Summit Crown sent Lucas, 2 attorneys, the HOA management company, and a public relations consultant. Lucas began by saying the historic avalanche was an exceptional event caused by unusual conditions unlikely to repeat under modern forest coverage. Rebecca raised her hand. Didn't your construction crews remove part of that forest? Lucas said the cleared corridor represented a small percentage of the slope. Alan's model showed that the location mattered more than the percentage. The removed trees stood directly along the projected flow path. Another buyer asked why the 1996 event didn't appear in the sales disclosures. Lucas said avalanche studies were technical permit documents, not individual property disclosures. Hannah Pierce, a buyer whose cabin sat near the clubhouse road, asked whether her property fell inside the revised runout. Lucas said the model remained preliminary. She asked whether Summit Crown would allow buyers to cancel while engineers completed the review. The company's attorney answered, purchase contracts allowed modifications to planned amenities and construction schedules. Buyers weren't automatically entitled to cancel because of a preliminary engineering issue. That response changed the room. People had arrived worried about a ski lift. They left worried about whether Summit Crown would trap them inside contracts while deciding if the center of the development sat inside an avalanche corridor. 29 buyers signed a demand for independent disclosure. They wanted the 1,997 report, Alpine Risk Correspondence, Revised Model, Lift Financing, HOA Operating Budget, Insurance Requirements, Alternate Route Analysis, and all documents related to avalanche responsibility. Summit Crown produced some records voluntarily. Others arrived only after buyer attorneys filed formal demands. The lift operation agreement was especially revealing. Summit Crown would build the lift through an affiliated company called Crown Mountain Transit. The HOA would purchase the completed system for $12. $8 million under a 25-year payment schedule. Crown Mountain Transit would operate and maintain it during the first 5 years. After that, the HOA could renew the contract or hire another qualified operator. Avalanche control responsibility transferred to the HOA on the first day of operation. The developer kept the construction and financing revenue. Homeowners received the mountain risk. The agreement required the HOA to indemnify Crown Mountain Transit for claims arising from terrain conditions outside the mechanical lift equipment. In plain English, if the cable, brake, or motor failed because of operator negligence, the contractor might be responsible. If an avalanche struck the lift, closed the trails, damaged a tower, or injured a skier, much of the liability could fall on the HOA. The association would accept that obligation before homeowners controlled the board. Lucas had signed both sides of the contract, once as Summit Crown's executive, once as HOA president. The arrangement looked familiar. A developer-controlled association agreeing to purchase expensive infrastructure from the developer's affiliate before residents received voting control. That structure wasn't automatically unlawful. New developments often required developer-appointed boards to sign initial service and infrastructure agreements. The concern was whether the terms were fair, disclosed, and supported by realistic budgets. This one wasn't. An independent lift consultant reviewed the contract. He estimated fair construction value between $8, $7 million, and $10. $2 million. Depending on the final avalanche controls, the HOA would pay $12. $8 million plus maintenance. Insurance, snow safety, and eventual major component replacement. That could be acceptable if the system operated reliably and increased property value. It became dangerous if the preferred route couldn't be insured or permitted. The buyer group demanded that Summit Crown suspend the HOA purchase agreement. Lucas refused. He said uncertainty around the route made contractual stability more important, not less. Rebecca asked why homeowners should accept a lift before knowing where it would be built. Lucas replied that the developer needed a committed buyer to maintain financing. There it was. The HOA purchase agreement wasn't written around the homeowner's needs. It was written around the lender's. Julia requested the project financing file through our lawsuit. The lender had advanced $6, $9 million toward the lift. The loan required 3 conditions before final funding: permanent site control for every tower and terminal, unqualified state safety approval, and continuous construction insurance. Summit Crown had none. It didn't control my land. The ropeway board suspended review. The insurer reserved coverage. The lender issued a default notice but allowed Summit Crown 60 days to cure. If it couldn't, the lender could stop funding and demand additional collateral. The broader Whitecap Village development secured part of the loan. That meant a lift failure could affect roads, utilities, the clubhouse, and unfinished cabins. Summit Crown returned with another easement offer, $2 million. That was more than 3 times the company's first proposal. I refused. The land rights question was almost resolved in court. But the avalanche problem made the decision simpler. Even if I sold the corridor, Summit Crown couldn't safely operate the original route without major redesign. Lucas said a permanent easement would allow engineers to install snow fences and control systems. I asked how many explosive stations, access route, and remote release devices they expected to place on my land. He said the final program remained under development. Then you're offering $2 million for rights you can't define. We can define them after the route review. That's when you define them before asking me to sign. Lucas increased the offer to $2. $5 million. I still declined. He accused me of using the avalanche report to raise the price. I reminded him that I hadn't named a price. He had. Julia proposed a different settlement. Summit Crown would abandon the route across my property and construct the northern alignment entirely on its own land. The company would restore my timber, remove every foundation, repair the logging road, protect the spring, and compensate me for damages. In return, I would release ordinary civil claims after independent restoration. Avalanche and buyer issues would remain between Summit Crown, regulators, insurers, and homeowners. Lucas rejected that proposal. The northern route was more than an inconvenience. It required approximately 7 miles of additional cable, 4 more towers, a mid-station angle assembly, and a new upper connection with Whitecap Ridge Resort. Initial cost estimate $4. $1 million beyond the original project. Construction would take at least 14 months. The lift wouldn't open for the coming winter. 11 premium cabins near the original lower terminal would lose direct ski access. 4 might need to be removed from the site plan to create space for the new base station. Summit Crown had built its development around the cheapest straight line. That line happened to cross my land in a historic avalanche path. The lender hired its own engineering team. Its consultants evaluated 3 options. Option 1 retained the original alignment with stronger towers, remote avalanche control equipment, reinforced terminals, strict closure rules, and permanent rights over my land. Estimated additional cost $3. 6 million. Excluding the easement, the insurer said it wouldn't quote final coverage without at least 2 winters of site-specific snow data. That made the option financially uncertain. Option 2 moved towers 9 through 12 north while keeping the original terminals. The revised line still crossed my property and clipped the edge of the modeled runout. It reduced, but didn't eliminate the hazard. Option 3 adopted the full northern route on Summit Crown land. That alignment crossed steeper construction terrain but avoided the historic runout and required no rights from me. The independent engineers recommended option 3. Summit Crown's executives overruled Lucas and selected it. The decision didn't end the dispute. The company still had to redesign the village center, renegotiate with Whitecap Ridge Resort, fund the extra construction, and explain the delay to buyers. Lucas was removed as HOA president. Summit Crown appointed its compliance director, Allison Kerr, to the board. Her first letter to buyers acknowledged 4 facts. The original lift route lacked confirmed property rights. Historic avalanche information had been omitted from the operating model. The coming winter opening was impossible, and the HOA purchase agreement would be suspended pending independent review. It was the first honest update buyers received. 21 buyers canceled their contracts under negotiated releases. Summit Crown returned approximately $4, $8 million in deposits. Other buyers stayed after receiving price adjustments, extended completion protections, and the right to review the new route before closing. Rebecca and her husband remained under contract. They liked the area and believed the project could still succeed if homeowners gained control over the lift agreement. The lender required Summit Crown to place $5 million into a controlled account for redesign, avalanche engineering, and buyer claims. Construction resumed on roads and cabins outside the hazard area. The original lift remained frozen. Then winter arrived early. A series of storms deposited more than 6 feet of snow across Whitecap Ridge during the first 3 weeks of December. No passengers used the unfinished lift. No workers were allowed inside the restricted corridor. Allen and the state installed temporary weather stations and remote cameras to collect data. On December 19, a week later failed inside the East Bowl. The avalanche wasn't as large as the 1,996 event. It traveled farther than Summit Crown's modern model predicted. The slide crossed the cleared corridor between towers 9 and 10. Snow and broken timber struck one of the partially assembled tower sections stored on the ground and carried it almost 180 feet downhill. Nobody was injured. The temporary closure worked. The event provided physical evidence. The historic report wasn't describing an impossible outlier. The slope could still release into the proposed lift corridor under modern conditions. Insurance adjusters documented the damaged tower section. The ropeway board required Summit Crown to abandon every foundation inside the original route before considering a new permit. Lucas described the avalanche as unfortunate timing. Alan called it useful data delivered without casualties. I stood near my house and watched the debris settle across the upper meadow, for the first time since Summit Crown entered the land. The mountain had spoken in a language no attorney could reinterpret. The company stopped arguing for the old alignment. Restoration planning began in spring. Removing 7 concrete foundations from mountain terrain required more care than pouring them. Contractors couldn't simply break the concrete and leave fragments inside the soil. Each foundation extended between 8 and 14 feet into the ground. Engineers developed a plan to cut the foundations below grade. Remove accessible steel and concrete. Fill the remaining shafts with clean material. Restore drainage. And replant the corridor. I wanted complete removal. The restoration engineer warned that extracting every underground section could disturb more soil, damage the spring, and increase erosion. We compromised. All above-grade material. Tower anchors. Cable. Roads. Fuel equipment. And construction debris would be removed. Deep concrete below a specified level could remain only if tested. Mapped. Sealed. And legally abandoned with no future access rights. Summit Crown would fund 15 years of slope and vegetation monitoring. The company valued the destroyed timber at $310. Ling ling ling. My forester calculated $680. 000. When long-term growth, access damage, a replanting, and mature tree loss were included. The 2 appraisers settled at $525. Ling ling ling. That amount became part of the restoration package. Summit Crown also agreed to pay my legal, engineering, surveying, and snow safety expenses. We appeared close to settling the property claims. Then the lender's forensic review reached Alpine Risk Consultants, Daniel Cross, the analyst who removed the 1,996 avalanche from the final model, had exchanged more than 200 emails with Lucas. One message contained an attachment called Whitecap Density Preservation Plan. The document analyzed how avalanche mapping affected cabin locations. If Summit Crown used the full historic runout, 17 cabins would fall inside. Zones requiring construction restrictions or additional engineering. 11 of those cabins were among the project's most expensive. Moving the lift north protected those homes only if the runout map remained narrow. The omitted avalanche event wasn't about 4 towers alone. It preserved tens of millions of dollars in sellable cabin inventory. Another email from Lucas stated, "Do not let a 30-year-old slide redraw the village. Model operational mitigation around the approved density." Daniel replied, "State reviewers may require disclosure if historic report enters record." Lucas answered, "Then keep analysis focused on current dataset, unless specifically asked." Summit Crown's internal team knew the historic map threatened cabins, roads, and the clubhouse service area. The company didn't merely choose an aggressive lift route. It shaped the hazard model around the number of cabins it wanted to sell. The lender sent the emails to the county planning department, ropeway board, assuré, and buyer attorneys. The county placed geotechnical and avalanche review holds on 17 cabin lots. 8 already had foundations. 3 had completed exterior shells. No one claimed those structures would be destroyed by the next snowfall. The county required site-specific risk evaluation before further work. Summit Crown's $5 million reserve no longer looked adequate. The avalanche consultant hired by the lender expanded the model across the entire village center. His results identified 3 categories. 9 lots sat outside the significant runout under every reasonable scenario. 5 lots fell inside a low-frequency powder cloud zone where reinforced design and operational closures might be sufficient. 3 lots, plus part of the service road, overlapped denser debris paths under extreme scenarios. Those 3 cabins shouldn't remain in their planned locations. Summit Crown removed them from the project. The partially built structures were dismantled, and reusable materials were moved to replacement lots. The 5 conditional lots received reinforced lower walls, protected utility connections, evacuation restrictions, and revised disclosure packages. The service road was shifted 60 feet north. The clubhouse remained outside the dense flow zone but required upgraded glazing, protected emergency equipment, and winter closure protocols for part of its rear service area. Those corrections added another $6, $2 million to the project. They also reduced Whitecap Village from 84 cabins to 81. Summit Crown could absorb 3 lost lots. The larger problem was trust. Buyers wanted to know why the company had accepted deposits while holding a report showing the hazard extended farther than disclosed. A group of 32 buyers filed claims alleging material omission and misrepresentation. Summit Crown entered mediation. Some buyers canceled. Others received substantial price adjustments, structural upgrades, or extended rescission rights. The company didn't collapse. Its projected profit did. Lucas was placed on administrative leave. During deposition, he defended his decisions as normal engineering judgment. He said historic events shouldn't automatically control modern development. That statement was true in principle. Old events require context. The problem was that he hadn't presented the event and explained why engineers discounted it. He removed it. The difference between analysis and concealment is whether other qualified people can see the evidence you chose not to use. Alpine Risk terminated Daniel Cross. The consulting firm's insurer contributed to buyer and project corrections. Daniel surrendered his professional license temporarily while the state engineering board reviewed whether he violated disclosure obligations. No criminal charge had been filed. Safety modeling involves judgment, and poor judgment isn't automatically fraud. The board focused on whether he knowingly omitted material information from a certified report. Lucas's role extended beyond engineering. He had signed the site control certificate, the HOA lift purchase agreement, lender representations, and buyer disclosures. Summit Crown's outside counsel began reviewing whether his statements exposed the company to additional liability. Then Julia found a payment inside Crown Mountain Transit's records. 2 months before Alpine Risk issued its final model, Summit Crown paid Daniel Cross a $175,000 schedule completion incentive through a consulting company he owned. Alpine Risk's main contract already paid for the avalanche study. The incentive didn't appear in the project's disclosed consultant schedule. Daniel claimed it covered after-hours, modeling, and rapid field review. Lucas approved it personally. The payment might have been legitimate. The timing made it impossible to ignore. It was issued 4 days after Daniel sent Lucas the email, warning that the 1,996 event could force route relocation and density reduction. The lender referred the payment to outside investigators. Alpine Risk said it had never authorized Daniel to bill Summit Crown separately. Daniel's employment contract prohibited undisclosed client payments. The engineering board review expanded. Summit Crown demanded repayment. Lucas's administrative leave became termination. Before leaving, he transferred several project folders from his company laptop to a private cloud account. Dominion Crest's security system recorded the transfer. A court ordered preservation of the files. One folder was titled Caldwell Resolution. It contained draft strategies for acquiring my mountain corridor. The earliest document was dated 2 weeks before Lucas first offered me $420. Ling ling ling. The strategy listed 3 stages. Negotiate voluntary purchase. Assert historical timber rights if negotiations fail. Begin construction before final litigation to create operational reliance and equitable pressure. The company hadn't discovered the expired logging easement after I rejected its offer. Lucas planned to use it from the beginning if I said no. Another document estimated that once 40 cabins were pre-sold and lift foundations were installed, the cost of stopping the route would exceed $20 million. Beside that number, Lucas wrote, at that point, landowner resistance becomes economically irrational. That was how he saw me, not as an owner with a legal right to refuse, as a person who would eventually behave rationally according to the financial pressure he created. The folder contained one final map. It showed a proposed avalanche control zone extending far beyond the lift corridor. The zone covered 26 acres of my property. Summit Crown planned to obtain those rights after the lift became operational. The rights included remote explosive systems, snow fences, permanent weather towers, helicopter access, seasonal closures, rescue staging, and authority to remove additional forest. None had appeared in the $1 million easement offers Lucas presented to me. Even if I had accepted, Summit Crown would have returned later, demanding control over a quarter of my land to manage a hazard it already knew existed. The lift wasn't the end of the taking. It was the first structure designed to make the rest unavoidable. Julia added the strategy documents to our claims. Summit Crown's new executives stopped defending Lucas's access theory. They accepted that construction had begun as deliberate leverage. The company increased its property settlement offer to $3. $4 million plus complete restoration and long-term monitoring. I was prepared to accept if 3 conditions were added. The settlement couldn't transfer any cost to Whitecap Village HOA. Every access and avalanche control claim over my property had to be permanently released, and buyers had to receive the historic avalanche documents before voting on the revised lift agreement. Summit Crown accepted the first 2. It resisted the third. The company argued that buyer disclosure belonged in separate mediations. I refused to sign. A project built on omitted information couldn't be corrected with another omission. The settlement paused. Then a state investigator completed the financial trace of Daniel Cross's $175. 000 incentivi. The money didn't come directly from Summit Crown's ordinary consultant budget. It came from a Whitecap Village marketing account funded partly by buyer deposits. The invoice description read, pre-opening ski access certification support. Summit Crown had used buyer money to pay an undisclosed side fee to the engineer, whose narrowed avalanche map preserved the value of the cabins those buyers were purchasing. The state securities and real estate regulators requested the complete sales file. The lender suspended all remaining project funding. Whitecap Village wasn't merely delayed now. Without a new financing agreement, Summit Crown had enough cash to protect unfinished structures for the winter, but not enough to complete the northern lift. Restore my mountain, correct the 17 cabin sites, and settle buyer claims. The developer had reached the point Lucas once predicted for me. Continuing resistance had become economically irrational. Only this time, the pressure wasn't built on my land. It was built inside Summit Crown's own records. The company had 30 days to secure new capital or place Whitecap Village into a court-supervised restructuring, and according to its internal cash report, it had only 19 days before the first major contractor payments came due. Summit Crown didn't file for bankruptcy. Not immediately. The company owned valuable land, partially completed cabins, roads, utilities, a clubhouse, and lift equipment that could still be used on the northern route. Its problem was liquidity. The assets remained valuable. The existing lender no longer trusted the documents supporting them. Summit Crown had 19 days to find money without transferring Lucas's mistakes to buyers or the future HOA. The company approached 3 private investors. 2 walked away after reviewing the avalanche reports and pending claims. The third was North Star Mountain Partners, a firm specializing in distressed resort projects. North Star didn't offer cheap money. It offered enough money to finish the project under strict conditions. Lucas and every executive involved in the original lift approval had to remain outside management. An independent construction monitor would control all major payments. Buyer deposits would remain inside protected escrow accounts. Whitecap Village HOA couldn't purchase the lift until homeowners elected a majority of the board and approved the final operating agreement. Summit Crown had to fund my property settlement, avalanche correction, buyer claims, and restoration work before North Star released money for new cabin construction. The northern lift route had to receive complete safety, insurance, and site control approval, and every buyer had to receive the historic avalanche report, modern model, corrected site map, operating budget, and known risk disclosures. North Star wasn't acting from kindness. It demanded priority repayment, additional collateral, a share of future sales, and control over the project budget. Summit Crown's owners would lose much of their expected profit. That was the price of survival. The restructuring closed 11 days before the contractor payment deadline. North Star deposited $22 million into controlled project accounts. Not all of that money represented new losses. Much of it would complete cabins and infrastructure that still had market value. But Summit Crown no longer controlled how the funds were spent. For the first time, every dollar had to follow an independently reviewed plan. My settlement returned to the table. Summit Crown accepted all 3 of my remaining conditions. Whitecap Village HOA would pay none of my damages. Legal expenses, restoration costs, or avalanche control liabilities created before transfer. The company recorded a permanent release of every claimed logging, lift, ski, recreational, rescue, explosive control, helicopter, trail, snowmaking, utility, and maintenance right over my property. The only surviving third-party right was the electric utility's narrow recorded corridor near the county road. Buyers received the complete avalanche record before voting on the revised lift agreement. Summit Crown paid me $3. 4 millions. Restoration and long-term monitoring were funded separately through a $2 million bond. The cash settlement covered trespass, destroyed timber, loss of use, damage to the spring area, professional expenses, emotional disruption of the property, and release of my remaining civil claims. Some people later described the payment as a windfall. They didn't see the taxes, legal bills, engineering expenses, or years of restoration. They also didn't understand what Summit Crown had attempted to acquire. The company didn't want a narrow strip for 7 towers. It intended to control 26 acres through lift, avalanche, rescue, and access rights for decades. The settlement compensated for what had been damaged. It didn't sell the mountain. The easement still didn't exist. Restoration began in early summer. Helicopters removed the 3 tower sections stranded on my land. Crews dismantled temporary roads, fuel storage, generators, work platforms, survey monuments, and construction fencing. Every piece of steel was counted. Every load of demolition material received a destination record. The 7 concrete foundations required different treatment depending on depth and location. 2 near the spring were removed completely because leaving them could affect drainage. 3 were cut below grade, pressure tested for contamination, and sealed with clean material. 2 on the upper slope were extracted in sections under geotechnical supervision. The abandoned shafts were filled and compacted. Engineers reshaped the disturbed areas to match the original slope as closely as practical. They installed biodegradable erosion control mats and water bars along the damaged logging road. The old road wasn't erased completely. A faint bench remained, where timber trucks traveled decades earlier. Summit Crown narrowed it to its historic 12-foot width, removed modern improvements, repaired drainage, and closed both ends at my boundary. Because the temporary logging agreement had expired in 1993, the company recorded a formal disclaimer confirming Whitecap Village held no present access rights. The spring became the most delicate part. Construction vehicles had compacted soil near its recharge area. Fuel storage sat uphill from it for 6 days before the court ordered removal. Water tests found no petroleum contamination. Flow had declined by approximately 12% during late summer, probably because of disturbed drainage and unusually dry weather. Summit Crown installed shallow diversion structures to direct surface water away from construction scars without changing the natural spring source. The company funded 15 years of quarterly water quality and flow monitoring. If contamination or measurable construction-related loss appeared later, the restoration bond remained available. The forest would take longer. Summit Crown had cut 94 trees across the entire corridor, including the 37 I counted on the first day. Most were lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. A few were mature western larch. My forester rejected the company's first proposal to plant 94 seedlings, replacing trees, 1 for 1, ignored mortality, lost age, habitat, and the widened corridor. The final plan planted 420 native seedlings in irregular clusters, designed to resemble natural forest regeneration. Crews added protective tubes where deer and elk browsing posed a risk. Summit Crown had to replace failed trees for 7 years. The company also funded invasive plant control and annual survival surveys. The upper meadow remained visibly scarred through the first winter. By the 3rd summer, grass covered most disturbed soil. By the 5th, young trees began hiding the foundation sites. I'll never live long enough to see the corridor look exactly as it did before Summit Crown arrived. Restoration doesn't reverse time. It gives the land a chance to continue without carrying the full shape of someone else's mistake. The northern lift required an entirely new design. Its lower terminal moved 100 feet northeast of the original location. 4 additional towers carried the cable around the historic avalanche runout. The alignment stayed inside Summit Crown property until connecting with Whitecap Ridge Resort through a newly negotiated upper easement. The State Ropeway Board required independent site control verification for every tower. No legal summary was accepted without underlying deeds and recorded documents. The avalanche plan incorporated the 1,978 and recent winter events. Engineers used conservative snow depth assumptions and updated terrain data. The northern route avoided the main runout, but it still operated in mountain conditions. The plan included weather stations, closure thresholds, remote avalanche control devices above designated ski trails, trained patrol staff, rescue equipment, and annual review by an independent specialist. None of those systems crossed my property. Whitecap Ridge Resort already operated a professional patrol and avalanche program. Under the new agreement, its team would manage control work and emergency response for the connecting terrain. The HOA wouldn't run explosives operations. That responsibility remained with qualified resort professionals. The revised operating budget changed dramatically. Summit Crown's original plan allocated $18,000 per year for snow safety. The corrected budget allocated $275,000 for resort patrol services, avalanche monitoring, insurance, training, inspection, and emergency reserves. Lift mechanical maintenance received another $190,000 annually. The numbers made HOA dues higher than early sales estimates. They also reflected what operating a private mountain lift actually cost. Buyers received the full budget. Some walked away. Others accepted that reliable ski access wasn't a free decorative amenity. The lift cost increased from $9.4 million to approximately $15.8 million after rerouting, redesign, damaged equipment replacement, avalanche systems, and financing delays. Summit Crown and North Star absorbed the construction overrun. The future HOA would purchase the completed lift based on an independently appraised value, not the total amount the developer spent correcting its mistakes. That distinction saved homeowners millions. An independent appraiser valued the finished system and related operating rights at $11.6 million. The HOA purchase agreement was rewritten around that number. The 25-year payment schedule dropped accordingly. Summit Crown couldn't charge residents for foundations abandoned on my land, legal fees, buyer settlements, or the cost of correcting the unsafe route. Those expenses remained with the developer. Homeowners elected 4 of 7 HOA directors before voting on the agreement. Rebecca became the first resident president. She hired outside lift counsel, an insurance advisor, and a reserve specialist. The board negotiated 4 protections. Whitecap Ridge Resort had to operate the lift for at least 10 years under defined performance standards. Summit Crown had to fund a $2 million initial mechanical and avalanche reserve. North Star guaranteed completion before the HOA assumed payment, and homeowners could reject transfer if the Ropeway Board, assuré, or independent engineer withheld final approval. 71% of owners approved the revised agreement. It wasn't unanimous. Some residents believed the project should abandon private lift access entirely. Others considered it essential to the value of their cabins. The decision belonged to the people paying for it, not a developer-appointed president signing both sides before residents arrived. The northern lift opened 3 winters after Summit Crown first entered my property. I watched the opening from the upper edge of my meadow. The cable followed a line far to the northeast. The chairs looked small against the snow. I couldn't hear the terminal or see skiers from my house. That was the point. The lift worked. Whitecap Village got its mountain connection. My land remained outside it. The State Engineering Board completed its investigation into Daniel Cross. The board concluded that he had failed to include material historical avalanche information in a certified report and accepted undisclosed payment from the client while employed by Alpine Risk Daniel argued that the historic event didn't represent modern terrain conditions. The board didn't punish him for reaching a professional conclusion. It punished him for omitting the evidence and undisclosed financial relationship that could affect that conclusion. His engineering license was suspended for 3 years. He had to complete ethics training and obtain independent review of future hazard work before reinstatement. Alpine Risk paid an administrative penalty and entered a monitoring agreement for its certified reports. The company's insurer contributed to project corrections and buyer settlements. The $175,000 side payment was returned through a civil settlement. Lucas faced a different investigation. State regulators reviewed the site control certificate, buyer disclosures, HOA lift agreement, consultant payment, and files transferred to his private cloud account. Prosecutors didn't charge him for selecting an aggressive avalanche model. Engineering judgment, even biased judgment, isn't automatically criminal. They focused on financial and documentary conduct. Evidence showed Lucas authorized the undisclosed payment to Daniel using a marketing account funded partly by deposits. He certified permanent site control after receiving my written denial. He prepared HOA minutes for a purchase agreement that hadn't been independently reviewed, and he allowed sales materials to describe the lift route as secured. Lucas eventually pleaded guilty to 1 felony count involving false statements in a lender certification and 1 misdemeanor count involving misuse of restricted buyer funds. He received 12 months in county custody. Followed by 3 years of supervised probation, he paid a $75,000 fine and was prohibited from managing developer-controlled associations or passenger ropeway projects during probation. The sentence wasn't designed to satisfy my anger. I didn't need his punishment to validate my ownership. It reflected conduct. The state could prove beyond the land dispute. Summit Crown's civil consequences were larger. The company paid more than $13 million in root correction, restoration, buyer relief, avalanche redesign, professional expenses, penalties, and my settlement beyond its original lift budget. Its owners lost control of the project and most projected profit. North Star earned priority returns from future cabin sales. The development survived. The shortcut didn't. Whitecap Village ultimately contained 81 cabins instead of 84. 3 high-risk lots became permanent open space. 5 cabins received reinforced construction and detailed avalanche disclosures. The service road moved outside the dense runout zone. The clubhouse rear area closed during specified snow conditions. A real-time weather display inside the lobby showed snowfall, wind, hazard status, lift operations, and closure notices. The avalanche history wasn't hidden in a courthouse basement anymore. It became part of living responsibly on the mountain. Rebecca invited me to the first annual HOA safety meeting. I declined the formal speaking role but attended from the back. Whitecap Ridge Patrol explained the hazard plan. Residents learned what the closure colors meant, why certain trails opened late, how emergency notifications worked, and why nobody should cross a closed boundary. One homeowner asked whether the system guaranteed safety. The patrol director answered correctly. No mountain system guarantees safety. It identifies risk, reduces exposure, and closes terrain when uncertainty becomes unacceptable. That sentence was more honest than every early sales brochure. After the meeting, Rebecca thanked me. She said the buyers had originally seen me as the man blocking their ski lift. Later, they understood I was the reason the final lift had valid land rights. Realistic insurance, professional avalanche control, and a funded reserve. I told her I hadn't done it for them. Not at first. I did it because Summit Crown entered my property while I was grieving and decided speed would become ownership. The homeowners benefited because the same records protecting my land also exposed the risks they were about to inherit. Sometimes justice begins selfishly. You defend what belongs to you. Then the evidence reveals how many other people were placed at risk by the same decision. I used part of my settlement to establish a conservation trust for 64 acres. The trust doesn't prohibit all use. My daughters can maintain the house, harvest limited timber, repair roads, graze animals, and build within a designated family area. It prohibits commercial ski lifts, resort trails, explosive control zones, major subdivisions, and permanent recreational easements. The remaining acreage stays outside the trust to preserve flexibility. The conservation document ensures no future developer can reopen the same strategy after I'm gone. Summit Crown once believed my age, and Margaret's illness made the property easier to acquire. Instead, those circumstances made me understand how little time any of us have to protect what matters. Margaret's ashes are scattered near the upper meadow. I placed a simple stone bench beside the spring where we sat during her final walk. The bench faces west, away from Whitecap Village. On winter mornings, I can occasionally see lift chairs moving along the northern ridge. They don't cross the view. They don't cross the property. They don't cross the avalanche path. They follow a route Summit Crown owned before construction began. A simple idea. An expensive lesson. Lucas told me no judge would dismantle a regional transportation system because of an old timber document. He was wrong about the document. It wasn't old in the way he meant. A contract doesn't become weaker because the paper ages. The logging permission had a purpose, a width, and an expiration date. Its language remained clear long after the truck stopped running. He was also wrong about the lift. The court didn't destroy it. The evidence forced Summit Crown to build it where it could legally and safely operate. The original tower foundations disappeared beneath restored soil. The northern lift carried skiers without using my mountain. The homeowners received the amenity they purchased, and the avalanche corridor remained open enough for snow to move without passing through occupied cabins or fixed passenger infrastructure. That ending was more satisfying than watching Whitecap Village fail. Failure would have left unfinished cabins, unpaid contractors, angry buyers, and abandoned steel scattered across the ridge. Accountability created something better. A lift on lawful land, a hazard plan based on complete history, an HOA controlled by residents, a restored mountain, and a permanent record proving that no future president could confuse a 5-year logging agreement with ownership of the sky above my property. The young trees inside the cleared corridor are still small. Snow covers them completely during deep winters. In summer, green shoots rise above the grass, where concrete foundations once stood. Every year, the line becomes harder to see. That's what I wanted. Not revenge carved into the landscape. Recovery. A mountain doesn't need to remember the name of the company that damaged it. The documents will do that. If a developer built a $9.4 million ski lift across your land and pre-sold 84 cabins before securing the route, would you accept a multi-million-dollar easement? Force the lift to move? Or demand ownership in the resort? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. This video is a dramatized storytelling narrative based on real-life themes involving property rights, easements, HOA governance, mountain development, avalanche safety, insurance, and construction financing. Names, characters, companies, and specific locations have been changed. Property, development, engineering, and HOA laws vary by jurisdiction. This story is for entertainment purposes and does not constitute legal or financial advice. Visuals may be generated using AI tools for illustrative purposes only.